We're talking a lot about Western alienation, but here's something a little different. We want to talk about the west side of the alienated provinces. British Columbia is kind of the forgotten part of this separation talk. Writer Sandy Garossino joins me from Vancouver to discuss how the far side views its eastern neighbors. All right, Sandy, help me on this. Does Western alienation kind of stop at the Great Divide between Alberta and BC, or are you picking up something in BC as well?
Well, there's always chatter. I mean, name a province in this country that doesn't have chatter, but BC ain't going anywhere, Dawn. And, you know, you have to go back and look at how all of this started out, because there's a lot of gladiatorial back and forth going on here. But this all really comes back to climate. You know, it was 6 months ago that Jason Kenney declared war on climate action and a bitter vendetta against the Liberal government. And then we had a federal election. And what did Canadians do? They voted outside of Alberta. They voted 70% for action on climate change. So rather than having a national narrative on climate change, here we are. And where is British Columbia in all of this? You know, our GDP is almost the size of Alberta's. We're 4 times the size of Saskatchewan's. The Vancouver port is the largest on the west coast of North America. BC ports handle half of Canadian shipping traffic. And we're dealing with a lot of complexity here. Here in British Columbia, on the ground, there's a lot of quiet diplomacy going on, a lot of delicate negotiations. Just yesterday, 2 of the 6 First Nations that have launched lawsuits blocking the TMX pipeline withdrew their objections.
Right.
So there's a lot going on behind the ground, but we're being held hostage by a bunch of guys on Facebook who spent the summer putting up billboards about Trudeau and white people.
Oh, you sound a little frustrated with the whole Wexit concept.
Well, especially the name, by the way, because if there's a West, it's in BC, and we're not going anywhere, and we have no time for any of this. This is really a localized Alberta issue. I mean, there is some Saskatchewan, obviously, there's some Saskatchewan sentiment, but it's nowhere near Alberta's level of frustration. And Alberta is it appears that they're trying to use separation as some kind of cudgel to beat the rest of Canada into renegotiating an equalization formula that Jason Kenney's party negotiated years ago. And British Columbia, we also pay into that equalization formula. So does Ontario at a higher percentage of its GDP than Alberta. And we're just going like, what?
I gotta say though, Sandy, I mean, BC is doing relatively well economically. Alberta is genuinely distressed. There's like the office vacancy rate in Alberta is something you gotta see to believe. They've just lost a major oil company in Ancana going to the south. I just read about another oil company that shuttered its doors today. I mean, so you've gotta have some empathy for that voice of frustration that's coming out, even if you say, well, you know, it's just a sort of a bit of a trivial matter. It's not to Albertans, I don't think.
It's not a trivial matter, but it's not a matter for breaking up the country. And British Columbia will be shattered and kicked out of Canada by this temper tantrum. There's a lot of positive things Alberta can do. And like I say, there's positive action going on the ground. There are quiet negotiations, quiet diplomacy going on to help Alberta and to get something. But you don't always get everything you want. And Alberta, you still have the highest GDP per capita in the country. You still have the highest median incomes in the country. You're not the first province to have serious problems. No, Newfoundland had lost far more of their workforce. Ontario has lost a huge amount of its workforce in the manufacturing slowdown. British Columbia's forestry industry is in collapse. This is not the only region in Canada that has or will experience difficulty, but we go through these things together and you don't go right to the nuclear option. I'll say one thing, Peter Lougheed, who was a giant in Canada, went hammer and tong with Ottawa over energy issues for 14 years that he was premier, and not once did he whisper or breathe a word about separation.
All right, Sandy. There's going to be a few Twitter responses when we post this interview, but we always thank you for joining us. You tell it like it is, and your view anyway. All right, thanks, Sandy.